When the quiet employee finally snapped, what the boss did next. Topic 1. Workers who got their bosses fired. How shown. Story 1. I can't take credit for getting him fired, but I have a good story. My former manager was a moron. None of my coworkers liked him. He was rude, a bully, and didn't know what he was doing. I made an HR complaint a few months after starting there, so I feel like I helped build a case at least. Found out from long-term workers that he had many reports on his file already for various things, including harassment. One day we were just told he wouldn't be back. He was there the day prior. The complaint that finally got him fired didn't come from me, but you'll hate this. In February, he was casually speaking with a Chinese employee about coronavirus, and the manager referred to COVID-19 as Kung Flu. Employee complained and asked for an apology. The manager refused to even apologize, saying the employee, could quit if he didn't want to work for him. Yeah, the employee quit, and the manager was fired after several years at the company. Screw that guy. Story 2. Management was given an injured worker crap, not wanting to pay him, accusing him of gold bricking. Workers said, "Tell you what, do the right thing here or you'll be sorry." Management said, "Take your best shot." Worker called the EPA, and APCD told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. Sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. Cost the company massively in fines and remediation. All because you wanted to screw with one poor bastard. Story 3. For a while I was a project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer could not be satisfied, no matter how many people, how much attention, or how we bent over for them. Our programs director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer and instead just hammered his employees to do more and more and more. People on our team were being let go due to failure or quitting outright due to burnout, and he was complaining he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as General Dog's body, I happened to have the ear of our VP, and this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny that if the director was doing his job, how many employees that we knew by fact and reputation were good employees had failed. A week later, I heard the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. Story 4. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial abuser of female clients and our criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for other offenses, like being late to his annual bar fees. But even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could over a 6-period month. Story 5. Mine is pretty pedestrian but very satisfying. I was working in a garden center. I'd been there for a long time and was woefully overqualified for the job I'd been doing and was therefore very valuable in that position. Think ops manager skills at admin assistant position and pay. We lost our sales manager 1 year and corporate hired a new one. Let's call her Flora. She was a real piece of work. I don't know what her interview looked like, but in person she was instantly and constantly rude and strident and mean and curt and dismissive, and that attention-seeking brand of lazy where she threw her weight around without cause. Oh, and she talked crap about anyone not in the room and collected 75% of the credit for 5% of the work. She had some knowledge, I guess. But it's way easier to teach a competent manager how to grow flowers than it is to teach a jerk horticulturist how to be a human being. Anyway, for whatever reason, corporate loved her. So she stayed. With one thing and another, I got another job. This process was slightly accelerated by Flora, but only a little. I'd been looking for some time, mostly waiting for the right opportunity. When I gave my 2 weeks notice, I got an email the next day scheduling my exit interview with the head of PR. Now, my position didn't get exit interviews. Only managers and sometimes department supervisors did. Everyone at my store knew why I was leaving, so there was literally no reason for the store manager to pull strings to get me one. And he never said anything about it, but I knew. He set it up so I could tell the head of HR, a man I was very friendly with, that I was leaving because of Flora. And I did just that. I laid into her. I said that Flora was the only reason I was leaving after almost 10 years with the company. During which time I wrote the company's health and safety program, trained almost every other person who did my job at other stores, made spreadsheets that got used company-wide, as well as setting audit records that still stand to this day. And all for a few pennies over minimum wage. I said I was going because she was the worst and I couldn't take it anymore. I found out later she was let go. I was thanked by most of my old workmates. My manager never said a word about it to me then or since. He was a real OG. Story 6. Not my story, but my mother's. I watched on the sidelines as a teenager. My mother's job was basically a professional fundraiser. I don't know what else to call it. People came to her for help raising money for nonprofits or other foundations that needed it. This was a long time ago before social workers were more of a mandatory thing at high schools. My high school was very poor and did not have one. So my mother took it upon herself to set up a fundraiser to pay the salary of a social worker so my high school could have one. After raising all the money, she went to talk to the principal, who flat out refused, just saying the position wasn't necessary. My mother was pretty upset and just decided she would donate the money to supplies or something like that. I honestly have no idea what she did with it, but it did go to some sort of charity. After a few months at a Christmas party, the superintendent of all the public schools in the area was at the same party, and he struck up a conversation with my mother. After some small talk, my mother said it was such a terrible shame that the principal didn't take the money for the social worker's position. The superintendent was dumbstruck and then told her that he ordered the principal to find funding for that position, and when superintendent asked him about it, he replied with, "No one is interested in that, and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, he lost his position. And when we came back from holiday break, the school was hiring for his position. Story 7. I used to be a store manager at a sporting goods store in the mall. One of my co-managers was banging one of my teenage underage employees in that back stockroom after the store closed on a regular basis. This was going on for several months apparently. I found out when said teenager came to me and said that my co-manager promised her a raise that she never got. I asked her why he said that he would give her a raise. That is when she told me about banging in the stockroom. I had to call the police and corporate about this. We arranged this thing with the help of the girl, basically planned a meetup with my co-manager after work that the police went to. Essentially caught him with his pants down. Story 8 was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors are open, you get the hell off the ice. Some jerk decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I feel okay." Then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it, then do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Well, since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration because I felt there should be some sort of documentation or paper trail in case, God forbid, I end up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. The boss was fired by my next shift. Story 9. I was an intern at a tech company, and in a one-on-one mentorship meeting, my boss asked me what skill set I wanted to pursue in the future. I said I wanted to do back-end work. This was a programming internship. He replied and said, "Girls aren't smart enough for that type of work. How about we put you on the QA path? You'll do better there." At the time, I was so stunned that I just repeated quietly that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting awkwardly ended after that. I always thought that I would be courageous in the face of blatant sexism if it ever happened to me, but instead I was silent because I was a 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. Fast forward a few weeks, and I was out to lunch with a few coworkers who brought along a lady who had worked at the company for years. She'd been out on contract for a while, so I hadn't met her yet. Everyone was talking about the boss and some of the stuff he had done or said to them, mostly rude things. So I took a chance and mentioned what happened in that meeting. She said she would take care of it. Within a few days, he was fired by the big boss. I went on my first contract doing back-end work about a month later, and I loved it. As I understand it, I was not the first person to have serious complaints about him, only the last. Story 10. I had a job that required my supervisor to be doing evaluations of my cases and charts. She just hadn't in months. She and my director ordered me and my coworkers to do our own chart audits, fill out the forms, and they would sign off. I was so tired of not having adequate supervision staff meetings weekly where she yelled at us, and invariably someone cried due to the stress and lack of support and not having been paid enough to do everything I was doing in their job. I refused. I was told to do it or I would be fired. Nope. So I got fired. On the way out to my car, I called my former director, who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for the next day, and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked me what had happened at the interview. I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was on the board of the previous agency, so she called her, and I told her everything too. Director was fired and supervisor was reprimanded and put on close monitoring. She had just destroyed any chance of promotion and left shortly afterwards. I was just happy to have jumped ship from that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Story 11. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happened to work at the same place, different departments, and my supervisor would make intimate comments about trios, and asked what hotel we picked for our afternoon delight, stuff like that. It was so frickin' uncomfortable. Apart from this, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. Problem was, supervisor was one of the guys, and I was the only girl. Turns out his boss was disgusted, told his boss, who lost his mind. They started an investigation, which took 3 days. They interviewed staff. They corroborated what I said. They checked the security cameras. Saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking and was fired. When he was told, he guessed that I was the person who complained and tried to get me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my co-workers surrounding me as he was walled out. That was a lovely ending to it all. Story 12. I was working at a gas station. Now this gas station was a dump, tiny place that was getting robbed, and occasionally a drive-by would shoot it up. But I was broke and needed the money. I worked my first 2 weeks there, and payday comes. No paycheck. Okay, fine. Sometimes because of how timeliness works, it gets put on the next check. Next payday comes and still nothing. So I go talk to the owner, who tells me he's not been able to add me to the payroll and to check back with him tomorrow, and my paycheck should be there. Next day rolls around, and so does the boss man, who tells me he still hasn't added me to the system, but offers to pay me under the table, counts out a stack of bills. Now here's the thing. I'd been keeping track of my hours, and he was trying to pay me less than half of what I had earned. So I tell him that he needs to put me in the system and pay me properly, and I ask him if the money he's offering has had the tax deducted and tracked. Boss is surprised that I actually want to pay my income taxes. I remind the boss that tax fraud is a thing, but he didn't care. I got a little heated and demanded he pay me properly, or I would go to the labor board. Boss told me to go home and that the labor board won't do anything, so I did it. And with a calm fury, I proceeded to unleash hell on that guy. I walk home, and while I do so, I call the labor board, who immediately email me the forms I need that basically said he either paid me what I was owed or he would be forced to pay me and face some steep fines. Great. But then I have a thought, and I make another call, this time to the CRA, and I let the tax man know everything about him trying to pay me under the table, and they were very interested. A couple weeks pass. I finally get my paycheck, and I learn from several friends who had all worked there that they received a call asking if he had ever paid them under the table and assuring them that they would not be in trouble if they accepted. Well, of course, all of them had been honest and said he had indeed tried to. And that was the last I heard about it, until one day, a few months down the road, I stopped in after noticing a friend of mine was working there. They told me the rest of what happened, as they'd just been hired when it all went down. My call had started an investigation leading to tax fraud, evasion charges. But wait, there's more. Turns out it was discovered that those robberies that kept happening were staged to get insurance money. More fraud. Suffice to say, the owner was arrested. Story 13. My manager at a new job, let's call him Leo, offered to give me a ride home after a Friday night shift went overly long. Instead of turning onto my street, he went to a bar about a mile in the opposite direction so we could get to know each other. I had one drink and asked to go home. Instead, he bought me a second drink. I asked to go home again, and he tried to assault me. The details aren't important. Let's just say he was pretty aggressive. I emailed the owner of the restaurant about what happened and went to my shift the next day. Owner was outside the restaurant firing the manager, all on the word of a brand new employee he'd never met. I was so impressed, and the rest of the mostly young female staff were very grateful for the change. The restaurant was a great place to work. 2 years later, I started my first day at my dream restaurant. Did some training, sat down for pre-shift with the kitchen, and who comes out to present the specials? Oh, Leo, of course. He sees me and freezes up. After pre-shift, he tried to talk to me about working together, but I went straight to my new manager. I said I have history with a current employee that they need to know about. I tell my story, I show the emails between the owner and myself, they talk to Leo about it, and he is fired again. He worked in a really specialized food style where chefs circulate through all the restaurants. He later applied to work for me when I was the hiring manager and didn't get a call back, obviously. I'm out of the industry now, but I used to dream of getting him fired again. I want to haunt him for the rest of his professional life. Story 14. He was always slacking off. He'd go into a 15-minute task and be gone 2 hours. He'd have to shoot off early for a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, always with no prior warning and whenever he was obviously bored. This was, mind you, within weeks of the new shop opening and all of us being hired. I was young and went along with it for a while. My colleague was in her 40s and vaguely knew him anyway, so was not standing for it. She reported him repeatedly to our area manager, who decided to come down to speak to him about it. Area manager called in the morning, told him to stay in the shop today and send one of us out for anything that needed doing. He said he had something he needed to do, but the boss said, nope, need you in the shop. Somehow he didn't get the obvious message and went out anyway. The area manager came down and he was gone. The manager wouldn't answer his phone all day. Area manager was mad. At the end of the day, when we were closing up, he walked past, posted his keys through the door, and I never saw him again. Didn't even attempt to argue his case. Story 15. I quit. I went through everything in my exit interview. How my reviews were always crap, so she didn't have to give me a raise, but that I had emails telling me how great that same work was throughout the year, how I was written up because someone heard me say something mean. She couldn't tell me what it was, and she wouldn't repeat it, and HR never heard anything about it. She also did that write-up by herself instead of with another member of management per the company handbook. She also told me to work 80 hours a week. I refused to, and then got a new job within the week and sent in my 2 weeks. I also talked about how she threatened my job because I found out about her and a few other people changing reports to get them all of their bonuses. I got to meet with everyone about the crap she was pulling, except for the people that were in on the editing of reports. I met with the COO, CFO, VP of HR, and all of the legal team. After I left, she was immediately moved to another department and then let go of within 3 months. Also, the people that were changing reports were either let go or demoted. I do feel bad for leaving that job, though. Within the year, the department was fully let go, so my friends also lost all their jobs. Story 16. My boss had been with the company for around 25 years and was getting very complacent. He would show up around 9 a.m., leave for lunch about 11:30, get back around 1:30, and then sometimes leave by 2 or 3 for the day. It's not like no one noticed this behavior, but they wanted to put him in a position where there was a spotlight on him so he could either get with the program or they would get rid of him. So I was transferred out of that department because I was the one who was doing all of the work. Anyway, a year later, the situation didn't improve, so they let him go and gave me his job. Don't get me wrong, I didn't get him fired. He did that all by himself. But I knew what the plan was, and I didn't share the details with him because I knew how much he made, and I wanted the promotion and raise to go along with it. Story 17. Worked register at a tour company. I also had a manager who freaking hated me for some reason. She was probably the most annoying person I've ever met. Constantly yelled at us for no reason, got on to me about answering questions a new hire had when I was asked, not her, wrote down I was 30 minutes late for a shift, when I was 2 minutes late, etc., etc. We had a sneaking suspicion that she was taking money from our tills, as she was always the one who counted down the till, when someone got fired for stealing cash. I made it a habit to count down every bill when I gave it back to a customer because we would get paid docked if we were even $1 off. So if a customer had $23 in change, I would count 20, 1, 2, 3 in front of them, so I knew I'd given back the right amount. We also had cameras pointing at the registers. Well, one day my GM pulls me aside and says $20 was missing from my till, and they were going to fire me. I straight up told my boss she could look at all the cameras because I counted out all my bills for the customers. Lo and behold, crappy manager was the one who counted down my till and got caught on tape pocketing the money. She was gone by my next shift. Screw you, Jennifer. I won. Story 18. Didn't get my boss fired because he was the owner, but I did screw him out of a high-dollar contract. A little background here, this guy, complete jerk. He treated his customers like crap, so you can imagine how he treated his employees. This was a hydraulic repair shop. We rebuilt hydraulic cylinders, pumps, and custom-made parts, etc. I was a truck driver for this guy, and the only one in the shop licensed to drive this truck. The owner wasn't even licensed. Eventually, I got so sick of this jerk and made up my mind to quit, but I waited for the opportune moment to do so. My former boss was in talks with a steel company for a contract to do all of their hydraulic repairs, a contract that would have landed him millions over a period of 10 years. Keep in mind, this guy was the definition of dong head. My last day, I had to make an emergency delivery to said steel mill, and the contract hinged on this delivery. I load up the truck, then went back in, clocked out, and went home. My former boss called complaining why I wasn't there. I told him I'm tired of being treated like a frickin' abused dog and slave, and I quit. I told him good luck trying to get a CDL driver within the next hour, and to screw off, I quit. Well, he changes his tune real quick because now he was at my mercy, and he didn't want to risk losing this big contract. He must have been desperate because he offered a raise which was coming from the guy who never gives raises, meaning he was really in a panic. About a week later, I ran into a former coworker from said hydraulic shop who would quit a week later for the same reasons. This coworker told me the former jerk boss freaked out the whole day and he lost the big contract. The former coworker also stated that 2 more guys quit within the week and the former boss couldn't figure out why no one would stay. The former coworker and I laughed and joked, and both of us thought that the former boss will never figure out why no one wants to work for such a complete jerk. Story 19. It wasn't just me, it was a team effort. At my old job, we got a new food and beverage director, so he was in charge of our restaurant bar as well as our conference area. He couldn't care less for the conference area, so he focused his time on the restaurant, got rid of bussers, and made every server become their own bartender, made a new drink menu, and worked with the head chef for a new food menu, fired the people he didn't like, and hired his drinking buddies from old jobs to be servers there. He was an alcoholic, and he would always disappear into his office with a cocktail or a glass of wine and leave us servers out to struggle. I remember one shift in particular. I was scheduled to work lunch and dinner, and I was the only one scheduled during lunch. We were showing the local college football game in our college town, and it just so happened to be our rivals we played that day. Unsurprisingly, every table was full, every bar stool. I even had people standing and just ordering beer from me. My chefs were running my food for me. He comes out from his office to see how things are going. I'm eyeballs deep making drinks, and had just finished one of our special drinks. It was the colors of the team. He complimented me on how well I was doing. I turn around and he's gone and my drink is gone. Didn't see him again until he complained about his table in the restaurant and asked me to take the table. After a few months, everyone hated him, including his friends he had brought with him. On New Year's Eve, we would have a huge party and everyone was expected to work, even his boss was there. Halfway through the night, he said he had to go home because his wife and daughter were sick. But he had told his friends he was going to a concert right across the street. So he told his boss, went out our wraparound patio, and sure enough, you could see him with his wife waiting to go in. He didn't return to work. Story 20, I was working at a large, negatively viewed retailer at the time as an assistant manager. We worked single coverage generally, and I was supposed to work no more than 35 hours. My manager was hourly as well, and was at 44 max. He was working roughly 15, but punching in for 48. Came in the mornings even if I was scheduled, took in shipment, but didn't process it, then sat in the back. Took the company tablet home with him to take conference calls at home, took me out of view of the cameras and fake punched me, and called me a little female dog for asking him to approve my vacation and work his scheduled hours. Overall stand-up guy, I complained to my district manager, who told me I must have misread the scenario. I told her I was uncomfortable at work and felt unsafe working with him. She said, "You need to resolve it between you two, as I've never had any problems with him before. He was hired 3 months prior. I'd been with the company for 4 years, so that statement means nothing." So after considering things, I took my complaint to HR. After getting off the phone with our HR rep, who told me nearly similar things, that we could have a joint mediation call to try and resolve it, I got a phone call from DM again asking how I could go over her head like that it was disrespectful and insubordination. I left the day before Thanksgiving with no notice. For a specialty retailer, that's a huge blow. I prepped nothing for Black Friday. The entire back room was packed to the ceiling with unprocessed shipment boxes. It was bad. I found out later that my manager was fired for stealing and time card fraud shortly thereafter. The regional manager found out when he had to come in to help the store. Then shortly after that, the district manager was fired for withholding bonus hours for the stores in order to get her bonus for unused hours. And the HR rep for the area was fired the same day for not advocating for employees and taking the district manager's side, who turns out was her childhood friend. I was actually rehired by the same company because they put my termination in incorrectly 4 months later. Those that were still there welcomed me back with open arms, and I got promoted to manager 2 months after that. So glad to be out of that hellhole company, though. Story 21 Hotel Manager. My hotel was undergoing a full renovation. During this time, both my managers were putting in less than 30 hours a week, and I was racking up to 70 plus doing their jobs as well. I'm ambitious and knew it would look great on my resume, so was happy to bust my butt. 2 months in, I started to notice things going missing, like furniture funds allocated by corporate to offset LOR were not used, and just general BS. Found out both my managers were pocketing the $20K in discretionary funds allocated to us when I overheard a conversation in the back office. Reported them to corporate, and an investigation was launched. 2 days later, on a Friday, I had been put on a suspension for misconduct by our district manager, and Monday 9 a.m. I was told to clean out my office. I was burnt out at this point, so I took it as a victory, filed a retaliation lawsuit. District manager conducts the investigation with corporate and moved states. 6 months later, everyone is getting fired and charges have been pressed on 2 managers. I'm back here eating popcorn. Sad that I was great at my job, but can never work for that company again, though. Topic 2. People of Reddit who have straight up rage quit a job. What was the final straw? Story 1. Many years ago, while working in a manufacturing facility, my boss came into work already mad because his wife served him divorce papers saying, "Good morning" was apparently enough to set him off. He picked up a wrench from the table and threw it at my head. I ducked it, missed. Then I just closed my toolbox and wheeled it to the truck. Story 2. Godfather's Pizza. The manager wouldn't give me my paycheck at 8 p.m. on a Sunday because the money might not be in the account yet, but I could pick it up 9 a.m. Monday. This was decades ago, before direct and mobile deposits. The bank wouldn't be open until the next day anyway. All of the paychecks were literally in his hand at that moment. There were lots of issues before that, but that was the final sign that the manager was completely uninterested in reason. In the next few weeks, nearly everyone else quit. Then the manager was finally fired. Story 4. I was waiting tables while I was in grad school. I had requested a weekend off far in advance right after I got my syllabus, because there was a seminar pertinent to a class. Our professor expected us to go and write a paper. It was a decent chunk of our grade. The weekend comes up, and lo and behold, I'm scheduled doubles Friday through Sunday. I hunt down the manager and say, "I can't do that. I've given months' notice." She pulls the "requests are just requests, not guarantees." And I tell her point blank, I will fail this class if I don't go. She shrugged and said, "That isn't my problem." I told her, "Is now," and left. Like hell, I was going to fail a class for my master's degree, waiting tables at a freaking rainforest cafe. Story 5. One very busy night while waitressing, I was standing at a table of 12 in the middle of taking their order when another waitress came up to me and said our boss wanted us in their office that instant. So I leave my full section in the middle of chaos to go see what the problem is. My boss began to chew us both out because the other girl asked if I would switch shifts with her, and I had agreed. I didn't say anything, but was obviously annoyed because I just left all my tables thinking there was some sort of emergency. My boss looked at me and asked why I looked mad. I told him I feel like this could have been sorted without me. If you didn't want her to leave early, you could have just told her no, instead of pulling me away from our customers. They said, if you're going to have an attitude, get your crap and leave. I said okay and went to transfer my tables. I was over it. I'd worked there 3 years and the owners were alcoholics that treated us like garbage and spent all of the money on themselves instead of getting ingredients to make food or paying their employees. The other waitress came back out and said our boss wanted me back in the office. I went in and they said, put your apron back on, you're not fired. And I said, you're both freaking crazy if you think you can treat people the way you do and expect them to want to work for you. And I walked out. As I was leaving, they came out behind me saying I would regret it and I was never allowed back if I left. I threw up my middle finger and continued walking. Funny part is I let my boyfriend take my car to work that night, so I had to walk a mile home and break into my house. Story 6. At one office job, I quit after the first day because the lady training me would ignore me when our manager wasn't around, and I caught her snooping through my purse when I went to the bathroom. At another job at a clinic, I quit after a month because they made me do a solo receptionist shift without training me on what I needed to do to open the clinic, and then I got yelled at for not knowing what to do in front of patients. It was so bad some of the patients came up to me after and asked if I was okay. Story 8. I was flat out lied to about the position. It was a management position at a residential mental health facility, and I had taken it leaving a great paying but stressful position because it wouldn't require travel and was supposed to be much more laid back. On top of many other issues, I ended up having to work 8 hours straight without a single day off, even weekends and one holiday. So after a very heated meeting with upper management, where one person was flat out lying to cover their own butt, I sent a resignation email from the parking lot. Story 8. One of my roommates was working at a retail store in the mall in college. He told the manager, finals are coming up so I can't work Monday, Tuesday or Friday, but all other days are open. Comes in the Saturday before, and he's only scheduled for Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. He was like, what the heck? His manager actually asked him, what's more important, your education or your career with Hollister? He worked part-time and his parents were pretty well off, so he said, well, I guess my education is more important than a part-time retail job that I'm only working for beer money. Have fun with your career at Hollister, and walked off the job. We just couldn't believe his manager thought that was a convincing argument. Career at Hollister, get out of here. Story 9. I was working when I got the call that my partner of 7 years had been in a terrible car accident while visiting family in Florida. He was in the hospital and his mother called me to tell me that he wasn't awake yet. I was obviously devastated and scared out of my mind, told my coworkers and boss because it was obvious I was panicking, and they told me to take the rest of the weekend off so I could deal with things and prepare and clean his apartment for when or if he got back. Specifically, they said to come back Monday and it was a Friday. Next day, I was cleaning up his apartment and I got a call from my boss. He was screaming, asking why I hadn't come into work that day. I told him that I recalled him telling me to take the weekend off and come back Monday. He said to come to work immediately because they needed me. Against my better judgment and my emotional state, I showed up and clocked in. Boss came up to me through the stack of checks down on the counter that had just come in and told me, if you do that again, you're fired. This was someone who had never yelled at me before or even dared to speak to me in any stern way. Prior to my arrival, their store was an absolute mess, and I spent all of my free time, what little there was, reorganizing and cleaning and setting up new systems. For some reason, the fact he chose to start speaking to me this way and demanding my attention now at that time, it just made me snap. A chord was struck and it resonated strongly. I got the message clearly. He was one of those bosses who became controlling of anyone who became of value to him and his business. The moment you aren't available when they need or even wanted you to be, they were going to make you feel bad about it, so you were afraid to ask for more personal time or any other leniencies that you took away from work. I was literally reeling saw red. The moment he turned his back, I snatched my check, walked out with a full line of customers at the counter, and the phone going off with incoming orders, and I drove off. He blew up my phone all day. I never came back or called back. Fortunately, he made it home safe and healed up fine. Unfortunately, he passed away on our anniversary a few years later. I regret every moment I had to spend time with him that I passed up over that job or any other job for that matter. Story 10. Not me, but a colleague once wrote a long stinker of an email hit send at 10:30 a.m. and exited the building immediately. He blind copied all receivers but sent it to multiple departments of a large multinational I was working at, and no one knew who did or didn't get the email, except for the gasps and OMGs around the office. He was completely disgruntled and went in on multiple managers, supervisors, and various colleagues with absolute venom. It was amazing, still the best work email I've ever received, and some crap he called out actually had to be addressed by management. It brought about a lot of positive change. If you're out there, Khalil, that was awesome. Story 3, I never have. But my favorite example was when a coworker in student transportation who had finally gotten a position she wanted after years of suffering through stress, and another was called by management over the summer and told she was being reassigned to the stressful position because no one else wanted to do it. She had fought too long and hard to get what she wanted. Her immediate response was, "Then tell me what I need to do to resign." She did, and she's been at peace with her decision ever since. Story 11. I used to work at the Home Depot years ago as a head cashier. This was in 2003, 2005. I didn't personally experience this, but I had a lot of the lot guys coming to me telling me that there was one in particular that was giving them problems. He would frequently treat them like he was management without actually being management. He would also stand around doing nothing while they were working. I ended up firing him. My boss gave me hiring and firing powers. I hated having to fire somebody, but after having like 6 different people come to tell me that he was a problem, I had to do it. Story 12. Was having a meeting with the boss, who was a difficult guy to work with. He stood up and punched the wall. He didn't do it, jokingly. He bare-knuckled went at the wall of his own office like he was in the gym, hitting a punching bag. I sat there in astonishment for about 2 seconds, then stood up and left. Cleared out my desk, exited through the back door, without a word to anyone. There's no place for that conduct in the professional world, even if the guy does own the company. Story 13. Was promised that if I got my accounting degree, they would move me to IA so I could get hours toward my CPA. I worked my butt off. I graduated, and the boss said, "Yeah, we're going to move you to customer service." Sound good? Stayed late that night drafting a company-wide screw you email. Probably shouldn't have done that in hindsight, but some bridges just beg to be burned. Story 14. Had a sweet schedule working security in a Class A office building. 3 swings 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and 2 graves 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. per week. My weekend was Friday and Saturday. The graves were actually really chill and easy to deal with. I like them, but only 2 of them. Then we get a new security company. All the supervisors are fired and new ones from the new company are brought in. Suddenly, I'm working 5 graves. I ask for a chance to swing no dice. They offer to move me to a different site. It's 5 graves again. I find out my old supervisor is now working as a security manager at a local mall. I give him a call and he offers me a job, and I took it. Grabbed my uniform from the old company, drove to the office, walked. It dropped my uniform on the director's desk, turned and walked out. Went down to the mall and picked up my new uniform. Story 15. He wouldn't train me properly and then come and yell at me in front of the office. He would always threaten my job or like hiring someone else. I finally said goodbye. Hope you find someone better because I quit and will be leaving once other lady comes back from lunch. He tried to backpedal and ask if I was serious, and I never looked back. Edit. He hired me without any experience because he knew he could lowball me. I got paid pennies for what someone with experience would get paid. Story 16. The owner of the company told me to fire a woman for arriving to work right on time. It was always something different with him. Some ridiculous new rule that he applied retroactively to suit whatever mood he was in on any given day. And that particular morning, he took it as a personal insult and a show of blatant disrespect that his employees didn't arrive early. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't fire this woman, who I didn't even particularly like all, to satisfy this new whim of his. So instead of firing her, I marched into his office and quit myself. Funnily enough, the woman I wouldn't fire continued working for him for years. She might even still be there now, 20-some years later. Story 17. I was working the kitchen at a 24-hour Greek restaurant, hired as a dishwasher, also doing cold prep and maintenance. I was the guy peeling 50-pound bags of onions or carrots or potatoes, as well as making dry ribs, pizza salad, etc. I'd booked off 3 days over a weekend. Got called on day 2 at 7 a.m. telling me I was late. Got there and was told I was on the 11 a.m. start. Then it got changed to 4 p.m. when I went in again. Then got changed to 11 p.m. when I went in for 4 p.m. And when I went in for 11 p.m., it was changed again to actually have me off for the 3 days. 4 schedule changes in 24 hours. Laws here say 1 week minimum notice. That owner would change the schedule after you clocked out to say you work shorter hours on a regular basis, and you pretty much had to check at 7 a.m. to see if you were on for the day. I had my choice words, told him I'd be back in 2 weeks for my paycheck. Story 18. Worked at an upscale busy bar a couple years back right after COVID. We were constantly understaffed, overworked, and treated like crap from management and customers. One Friday night, my manager let the other bartender go early because he had a crush on her and wanted in her pants. I got overwhelmed by a rush, and he started bickering at me about not being able to handle the bar. I looked at him in the eye, about to really rage, and without a word walked to the back into the liquor room, grabbed 2 bottles of Jameson, put them in my backpack, and I walked out the front door. My manager's fearful, confused face while asking, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" was absolutely priceless. Best decision I made, and I'm not joking. Story 19. Well, I'm genuinely about to right now. My manager told me our dishwasher is broken and won't get fixed until at least Thursday, and I have to pull solo shifts next week because we're seriously understaffed after the 2 people were let go in January. Despite me telling management repeatedly that we actually need more people to account for all the vacation days and sick leaves happening right now. Story 20. Working as a mortuary transporter, the dude who picks up corpses and brings them back to be cremated for a family-owned crematory. Boss was kind of a jerk, and her husband was an idiot. Constant on-call overnight shifts and 0 PTO days, but honestly, I really enjoyed the work, so I put up with it. The problem was that my boss refused to do direct deposit. This was 2 years ago, so it's not like Dee Dee was unheard of. And she'd hand us out checks on Monday. I'd been on call the weekend prior to payday, and it was really busy, particularly Sunday night. I was out from like 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. picking up corpses. So on Monday I called out because I didn't want to drive a full shift on 0 hours of sleep. Well, in my constant sleep deprivation, I'd forgotten I was supposed to get paid. That Friday, I was talking to a coworker on our way to a pickup and mentioned how I couldn't wait to get paid next week. He gave me this look and told me, "We got paid on Monday," and asked if I'd never gotten my check. So at the end of the day, I went to my boss and asked, and she just laughed. She joked that she'd wondered when I would ask for it and had hoped I'd just forgotten. So her playing cute with my checks was just the beginning of the end. Then next payday, she sat us all down and explained that from here on out, drivers were not allowed to call out simply because they'd worked all night before. By this point, she'd driven off all the other transporters, and it was down to me and one other dude full-time, with another transporter coming in 2 days a week, and her business couldn't function if either of us called out. So I got my check from her, and then at the end of the day, I ended up working until 10 p.m. That night, I left her a note saying I quit effective immediately and to mail me my last check. A few months later, the other driver texted me telling me she had never replaced me. He quit and got hired at another funeral home and convinced the part-time driver to go with him. I just checked the website, and apparently they're still open, but I don't know how they managed with the nobody'd get the corpses. Story 21. Worked in retail. Sprained my ankle really bad while ice skating. Couldn't so much as get out of bed. Had to call in and take 2 days off before I was even able to limp to work. Soon as I got back in, manager pulled me into his office to scream at me for taking 2 days off. You know, for a physical injury that made it so I could not do my job. Threw a cold cup of coffee on him and walked out. My only regret is that the coffee was cold. Story 22. I had a boss at a dog daycare who was a pure sociopath. She deliberately tried to set her employees against each other with gossip and to listen to our conversations on the remote cameras and used what we were saying against each other. It gets worse, but she heard me talking to another employee about finding another job, then confronted me and told me she would just take away all my hours if I was going to quit. Then she heard me tell another employee I contacted the Department of Labor to find out if that was legal. It is, and ambushed me after lunch to fire me in front of other employees. So I heard you called the Labor Department about your hours. That won't be necessary. And at this point, I realized this is the only chance I'm going to get to unload on her, and I'm taking it. I went off. I unleashed the beast for 10 straight minutes right in her freaking face. I told her about when we lied to her face about throwing away shock collars she used on the customers' dogs without their knowledge or consent, how she's a miserable, ugly human being. The employees hate her. We all dread her coming in because she screws everything up, how she was so stupid, her husband is a predator, and probably assaulter raked her over the coals about the time she forgot a customer's dog in the car for 3 hours in May and then lied to a customer about it. I remember at one point I yelled, "Didn't you ever wonder why everyone who quits this absolute crapple has nothing good to say about working here? It's you. You are a miserable female dog." And eventually I gave her the finger, said, "Screw this, and screw you too, because I'm out." I talked to one of the employees who witnessed the entire thing later, and he said, "Well, you made a lot of good points." Story 23 wanted to take long service leave holidays but got denied because, quote, "We're too busy right now." A few months later wanted to take long service leave holidays but got denied because we're too busy right now. A few months later wanted to take long service leave holidays but got denied because we're too busy right now. I replied to that email with my resignation, handed in my pass to security, and walked out the door. Story 24. He literally gave me 72 hours worth of work and insisted it be completed in 36. When I pointed out the inconsistency, he said, "Do what you can." And when I submitted it, he called me from vacation to scream at me about mistakes. I deleted everything, walked away, blocked him on everything. And to be clear, I mean 72 business hours and 36 calendar hours. This definitely sounds like one of those bosses whose philosophy is, well, I'm the boss because I work harder. My employees don't work hard, so they don't make as much money as me. You know what I mean? I get that vibe anytime someone doesn't understand, the concept of time and the time it takes to do work. Even though you'd really hope someone in a position of power or control over anything would understand how time functions. Anyway, that is the last story for today. Have you guys ever quit a job? Let me know in the comments. I bet some of you have.